righty. So we'll go ahead and start for the interest of time. So I just want to say hello, everyone. My name is Nina Smallwood. I am a C37 dual. I'm in the dual program. Thank you, Rachel, for helping to assemble this panel. And thank you all for joining this afternoon for us to have this amazing chat with this panel that we have assembled of PGS alum. So I asked them ahead of time. So just so you know, for full transparency, I'm only going to introduce them by first name. And then when they go into introduce themselves in more detail, they'll be kind enough to say their last name. So we'll start off. I have Rachel. She is a senior program manager at Stop Waste. We have Matt, Deputy Director of Sustainability for the Director of General Services. And Paul, we hope to join later. So if he jumps in, he had a conflict, so he may come on from Sparkle Reusable. But we have Alan, or Ann, sorry, not but. And we have Alan, who is a public servant and municipal waste management specialist. So now that we've done that, I'm going to turn it over to them so they can go ahead and introduce themselves. So I guess I could start. Oh, Matt, you want to start?
Happy to. So I was a C10 MBA student, and since graduating from Presidio, I worked at the City of Santa Monica in their energy program, then was appointed by the Brown administration to a position with the Government Operations Agency to coordinate all state agencies towards their sustainability goals, which is a herding cats exercise for state agencies that don't necessarily have sustainability as their core mission. Did that until 2019 when I went over to Cal Recycle and was very much involved in the rulemaking on 1383 and familiar with kind of the policy arena around waste. So I'm so happy to be here today. And currently I've been about 11 months in my role with the Department of General Services, again, kind of getting state agencies to walk the walk and make sure that we're coherent, right? State of California talks a big game about climate change and sustainability, and if we're not doing that in our own operations, that really undermines the message. State of California owns 100 million square feet of real estate, 40,000 vehicles, 200,000 employees, so it's a big organization, and we can have a big impact just through our own emissions, but also as kind of setting an example and leading the way. So that's what I've been up to since Presidio. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Want me to jump in next?
Yes, please, Rachel. Thank you. And just tell us about who you are, brief thoughts on your Presidio experience, and then a quick run through of what you've been up to since.
Yeah, I'm Rachel Bosley, a senior program manager at Stop Waste, which is also known as the Alameda County Waste Management Authority, which is not the best name, so we usually go by Stop Waste. But anyway, we're a public agency in Alameda County that has a mission to reduce waste in the county. And I was a C8 and did it part-time while I was working at Stop Waste. So I'd already been at Stop Waste when I started, and was lucky enough to have my agency help support my degree in an MBA financially. But it took me 4 years because I was part-time and working full-time. I really appreciated my Presidio experience because I thought it really rounded out my knowledge and skills in sustainability more broadly, also on organizational development, which I've definitely used at my time at Stop Waste. And what I've been up to is I've been at Stop Waste for over 20 years. So it's really helped me integrate some of that knowledge into my daily work practice. At this time, I am helping to lead our agency's effort on addressing state law SB 1383, which is the short-lived Climate Pollutants Act. And it really puts a lot of onus onto local jurisdictions. So our support goes to our Alameda County jurisdictions to help implement that law. And actually, Alan is one of our jurisdictions, and works at one of our jurisdictions in Alameda County. So I'll turn it over to him.
Hey everybody. Yeah, hopefully you can't hear my 2-month-old daughter crying in the background, but that's going on right now. But yeah, I'm Alan McCauley. I was C19 full-time MBA at Presidio, like 2013 to 15. And yeah, as Rachel mentioned, I now work for the city of Fremont on the integrated waste management team in environmental services as an environmental specialist. And yeah, my primary work these days, we do a lot of different things, of course, but my primary work is SB 1383 that Rachel mentioned. And yeah, I love my time at Presidio, and yeah, but while I was there and then ever since, it just it's such a scrappy, group of professionals that, are so passionate about what we're doing and so willing to help each other, to get where we want to go, so that was has that kind of, startup mentality. And I just really appreciate that. And after school, I did like a patchwork of part-time jobs, like when I first graduated. So I was doing working for Rev, which was it was a sustainability coaching business associated with Presidio. I had a short gig at Stop Waste, leading the fourth grade field trips at the waste transfer stations where they could look at the garbage and recyclable bales and everything. And it was good. It's not what I wanted a full-time job at, like right upon graduation, but it didn't work out that way. But it actually was really helpful because it was great for networking and learning some new skills. And then that transitioned into a full-time job. So I was at City of San Jose on their integrated waste management team. And then my wife and 2 daughters and I live in Fremont. So I took the opportunity when it popped up to move over and do the same thing at the city of Fremont. And that was about 4 years ago. And yeah, that's it.
That's a lot. Thank you all. And I do see that Paul was able to jump on. So Paul, if you'd be so kind to go ahead, made it in time for the introductions. So if you could just tell everyone who you are, brief thoughts on your Presidio experience, and a quick run through of what you've been doing since you left.
Great. Thanks for having me, and great to see everyone. And I was late because there's a stop waste deadline for a grant today, and we're in the thick of it. So excuse me, I was having some collaboration talks. So let's see here. Since Presidio, well, during my Presidio time, I was working full time, and I had a baby, and I had bought a house just around that same time. So it was. I don't recommend like doing everything during your time to get when you're getting a master's degree, but I survived it. So I ended up staying in the same job after I was working in the nonprofit sector in the energy space. San Francisco Community Power was the organization, and it was very synergistic with a lot of the work that I was doing. I used it for research projects, and it was great, and it helped me kind of get through the business of it all. I ended up staying at that nonprofit energy world for another, I would say, 4 or 5 years after Presidio, and then after an opportunity arose to explore like a possibility of having my own business in the environmental social entrepreneurship space, it sounded like something that I felt like I was ready to do. I had maybe I had an inclination for entrepreneurship always, but having some of the tools that I gathered during Presidio gave me extra confidence, and I wanted to try that possibility. So I ended up diving into my own business around 2014, and it seems like I've always had a knack for finding like the bleeding edge of environmental concepts and being a part of it. So I was in the organic food industry before organic standards. I was in the energy space. I got my certification for installation of solar and wind systems in like in the 90s, when there was no permitting laws even for a lot of this stuff. And now in the zero waste kind of reusable space is still like the wild west of an industry. And so we're kind of wrangling with all that. But I feel like having the network, Presidio network, I've leaned in that network many times for help with students giving me operations plans. I was just talking to Ron Nazer and a couple other professionals. I saw Maggie here too over the years for various support. So I'm still tapping into it. I'm hoping to get even some folks to help me with a possible full-time position that we'll be having coming up.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That's exciting. So listen, there might be a job for someone on this call or someone who may watch the recording. So I just want to thank you panelists for talking, going in depth about the time and what you've done a little bit more. So as we shift, I want to turn it over to the audience to kind of like see if they have any specific questions for any of you. If you have any, please drop them in the chat. If there's something that maybe such as a current career, previous career, learning, job strategies, networking. Paul has already alluded to the networking, and that's one thing that a lot of alum have said. They've always talked about the amazing networking opportunities that happen within Presidio. So definitely I could see that's probably a strategy. So if any of these are of interest to you, please either raise your hand, drop it in the chat, give a couple of minutes for you all, and then we'll go into some questions that I have. Let's see, from Britt, I'm curious about how consultants can build a relationship with the city and waste haulers to help local businesses.
I could try to start with that.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, our agency Stop Waste does contract with a fair amount of consultants, over time, and of course we work very closely with our city partners in Alameda County. But I think I would say there's probably just a handful of sort of well-known solid waste consultants in the Bay Area that are, a little bit larger. So I think there's the aspect of like, if you want to get into consulting, there may be the possibility of, first joining, one of those organizations to get started. I think as a maybe sole proprietor consultant who it may be harder to develop the relationships with some of especially city partners, just because, you would be less known. But there are always opportunities because most cities especially have requirements to put contracts out to bid. So they want to make an equitable opportunity for folks to bid on that. So that's always something to look forward to. We often will have an RFP section of our website where we might have current RFPs out. A lot of cities do that as well. Waste haulers, I think, are a little bit more, they may look for folks that they know first if they're looking for consultants. But so that's some of my thoughts on that, but maybe other panelists have stuff to add.
Yeah, and I think Rachel hit the nail on the head. And I would also add that it takes a million years, so the process that she was talking about with the bids and everything and just getting from start to finish, can take a very long time. And yeah, it's just a lot of, can be a lot of red tape and procedures with, there's, different, at least at Fremont and I know other places, there's different levels depending on how big the contracts are of, how formal and how extensive the process needs to be. And then, in addition to that, if it comes to like a product or a service, we always need to evaluate if there's competitors or other, entities that can provide this service. And if not, we have to make justification with backing that, with evidence to back it up of why it's a totally unique, product or service that can't be provided by somebody else. Because as Rachel said, everything needs to be equitable and fair, as it should be.
I'm going to chime in too, and it's nice to actually see a question where folks are asking like, what are problems that need solutions in the space and how to find a niche. I think whoever enters the space, I think the space needs new thinking, and I think Presidians are well positioned folks to do that. Like just today, actually, I was looking at some of the questions that we need to address in our RFP submission, and one of them was the impact of reuse enterprise or intervention with reusables to an entity's garbage bills or other costs. And that's almost like a whole other project that we don't have the capacity to do. It's a question that it was almost like, hey, can you tell us, but I'm like, that's a whole different grant, personally, I think, of somebody trying to look at those impacts. And also I've looked at garbage bills, and they're impossible to really easily kind of break down and figure out, is there some kind of diversion analysis that also it can equate to, like, okay, this was reduced because of reusables being an intervening factor, or a circular system. I think there's plenty of room for those kind of innovative ways to look at the waste industry at the moment, or emerging, I think. So
thank you, Paul. Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Paul, because I was like, Johan's question was really good, and I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that before we dive in.
Speaking on entrepreneurs in the industry and stuff, I do think that, like our agency had put out this last month solicitation for 6 different categories of grants, and they are for both nonprofits and for-profits. So I think that whereas they can be somewhat complicated in filling out some of the questions, but I do think that there is, at least our agency is really trying to support some of that innovation in waste reduction and waste prevention. Particularly, our grants are focused in on more of those upstream kind of activities, rather than just once it hits the disposal space and trying to get it into the proper bins, looking more at the prevention and reuse aspects. And that's where I think entrepreneurs, can really, potentially get into the space, like Paul's company.
Yeah, reuse is a kind of the cutting edge, and there's a lot of ways to do that. So Cal Recycle had a reuse grant that was just a pilot, low dollar amount, but construction material reuse that Habitat for Humanity is doing. There was a company refilling wine bottles from Napa wineries, right? So not a huge reach, but a lot of wine bottles get used at those tasting rooms, and so just refilling those ones. Switching out disposables at I think schools, churches, places like that, with a set of reusable cutlery and dishwashers. There's some basic stuff that can be done, maybe some low-hanging fruit, but it's still capital intensive, maybe not as capital as intensive as a tire shredder or a plastic recycler, but it tends to be a pretty capital intensive industry.
And I'm just going to follow Matt to say that whoever also wants to help out grantees that want to submit an application to folks like Cal Recycle, I think there's a need for support, because these applications are extensive and require a lot of work. And if there was a consultant out there that specializes in helping entrepreneurs like us, with during the solicitation process, that would be something that we would welcome.
Wow, we have so many. Thank you for that. That was such a great answer. I mean, so it looks like there's tons of opportunities for Presidians to go ahead and insert themselves in helping finding solutions, and a lot of upstream as well. That's what it sounds like as well, for sure. I see all the amazing questions that we have in the chat. I'm going to definitely try to work those in as we get through, if we have time left, but I'm going to go over to one of the questions that we have for one of the panelists, for all of the panelists, actually, if you could answer this. So how have you seen the solid waste management space shift in your career? What have been the biggest wins for sustainability in this area, and what have been the biggest setbacks and challenges? And to clarify, kind of like, what trends are you seeing in the product and manufacturing are reducing waste? In your view, is the industry starting to shift away for more hard recyclables to things that, so I'm not sure if Rachel, okay, you're off, you want to take that? Thank you.
Sure, I can start. Well, I mean, I think in state legislation has had a big influence on how the industry has been shaped over time. 30 plus years ago, there was AB 939, and then much more recently, there is this very comprehensive, sweeping legislation of SB 1383, which that I think is probably the biggest piece of legislation to impact or affect this space since AB 939. And basically, it's trying to get as much organics out of the landfill as possible, because the organics in the landfill is what creates methane. And as you all know, that's the highly pollutant for greenhouse gas emissions. And so one thing that's been interesting about it, and also I think a challenge, is that it was written, the regulations were developed over a regulations process over a couple of years with Cal Recycle, that's the governing agency. And it's very prescriptive, and it basically sets jurisdictions as the responsible parties for the most part to implement aggressive requirements on commercial businesses, multifamily properties, and even single family homes. It's supposed to address all organics waste generators. So I think that's one of the most influential things that have shifted the space recently. And over the years, there's also been more emphasis that is trying to get at what we call extended producer responsibility. So there's been little pieces of legislation addressing certain product categories, but the newest one is SB 54, which just passed recently, and it's basically addressing a lot of the sort of hard to recycle kind of materials. And it's called the Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. And it's got a lot of components in it, but essentially it will be implemented over the next 10 years. And I think is probably another aspect of being the most aggressive within the United States, maybe even worldwide. Europe has always had a lot of progressive things as well, but as far as the US, I think it's going to be very influential in how the state tries to address plastics pollution and hard to recycle materials.
Wow, thank you, Rachel. I'm not sure if
if I can fill in and kind of color in the outline that Rachel filled out. 1383 is a huge change, and she's right. The way the law is written in California for many of these waste laws is the law is requiring local jurisdictions to do the work. So if the stop waste jurisdictions don't do it, they could get fined by Cal Recycle as the enforcement agency. So thank you, Rachel and Alan, and also sorry, Rachel and Alan. But that enforcement is important because it gives regulatory certainty to the recyclers, the anaerobic digesters and the compost facilities that need financing. They need to know that cities will be fined if they don't start collecting and separating organic waste. So we hear it from both ends. We want leniency from the jurisdictions, and we want stringency from the investment and recycling community. But you've all seen it in your own garbage bin, right? Now that my organics are going out in the green bin, my trash bags are all thin film plastic, right? I lift that thing out of, it ain't heavy, it's very light, and it's all thin film, because that's the one thing that can't go in the recycling bin or the organic bin. And, someone who's been in this world longer than me told me it is just so profitable to wrap things in shiny packages and sell them to people. And, I live down the street from the Blue Diamond almond processing plant, and they have silos full of almonds. And I'm sure those almonds are worth a good amount, but that's nothing compared to when you put them in tiny packages and put them on the shelf and sell them at Costco, for $1 for a little thing like that. It's the packaging that gives it value. And so to try to get in front of that freight train of money production is that's why it hasn't been successful for so long. So packaging reform had been talked about for many years. Ben Allen is a legislator from Southern California and is a real hero in this space, and tilted at that windmill for many years, and never it just wouldn't pass. SB 54 just did not get the support needed to pass. But the nonprofit world and some of the waste haulers actually put a ballot measure. They got enough signatures to put, a penny per fork, fee on disposable cutlery, and, fees, government collected fees on many types of plastic, which would end up being, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars coming to Cal Recycle. Good luck spending all that. But it ended up being a gun to the head of the plastics industry. And it was very popular, and it looked like it would pass. And all of a sudden, a lot more support came around for a legislative solution that could be, negotiated behind closed doors. And SB 54 passed, and the ballot measure was removed was withdrawn by its sponsors. So it basically puts so we have extended producer responsibility for carpet, mattresses, paint, and pharmaceuticals. And they really do get recycled. I mean, you don't see mattresses littered on the side of the road like you used to. And when they get recycled, like 80% of that material ends up in new products because it's run by the industry. They know how mattresses are put together. They know how to reuse the materials. And it takes very little staff at the state to enforce the law on those stewardship organizations. It's a very efficient way to get the industry setting up recycling. So 54 says that if you want to sell this type of plastic, number 5 clamshells for your Costco chicken, that material has to be recycled at a 75% rate in 10 years. So the plastics industry can either switch that packaging designer or that product designer can switch to number 1 and number 2 plastic that are readily recyclable, or they can start buying bales of number 5 and number 6 and using it and getting that recycling rate up to 75%. And it's on that industry to set up their stewardship organization to put the rebates, put fees on their own products, collect money, and give that out in terms of grants and financing for recyclers to actually get that material recycled. And if they can't get that recycling rate up, they're not going to be able to sell that product in California. So this sea change that we saw with 1383, keeping organics out of the trash, I think you're going to see another really significant change, keeping those hard to recycle plastics out of the trash. And so, waste is a seemingly intractable problem, and yet in really just a few years, California has made some huge changes that are going to be very impactful.
That is amazing. I'm glad at all the work that's been done. There's so many numbers that are floating around and all those things, but they're all great things that are happening in that legislation. Alan, is there anything, or Paul, that you want to add to that before we move on to our next question?
I would just say, one thing, it's a totally different topic, but I think something a lot of people have heard about is, or not totally different topic, but with China, the legislation or the changes that they made to develop their own, domestic recycling industry, and basically setting in a series of, laws or programs, like setting restrictions on what the material coming in can look like. And so basically putting a contamination level so low that they hardly accept anything from overseas. So as everyone knows, and a lot of the material from the West Coast does go overseas. So the recyclables that are baled up, a lot of it does. There definitely is some domestic processing with the high value 1 and 2 plastics and metals and glass and things. There are some domestic markets, but a lot of those other plastics we've shipped overseas for a very long time. And so when China passed these policies, the facilities just started shipping it to other countries, and there's all sorts of problems that have been well documented about how that material is managed in those other countries. And it's a whole nother long topic to to think about, how could we have all the domestic processing and keep everything here? Because of course it seems ridiculous, right, from Presidio perspective to have this huge, global system where we're shipping all of our, waste somewhere else. It's just crazy, right? But I think there's labor laws in a million, markets. Is there demand there for these different plastics? There's a million reasons that doesn't exist now, and all the things, that Matt and everyone are talking about, I think, chip away at trying to solve those problems. But it's just kind of crazy, how we've come to where we are, today.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, textile, how do we get rid? We were talking earlier before the call about textile waste exporting. That's one of the other things that we, with fast fashion, it's notorious. We ship so many billions of pounds overseas. So yeah, definitely trying to figure out a solution here to stop it from even going on a boat. That would be great. Okay, so as we know, one of the challenges for a lot of communities of color is that it can be a both lack of awareness and or accessibility to responsible waste disposal. Are any of you aware of any initiatives that would help ease the burden, ease the burden in these communities? Paul, would you like to take it?
Well, I feel like maybe that's a better question for like the city or county or state folks. We're just an entrepreneur trying to make an impact in the space. I know that the pandemic has caused, has caused a lot of interesting scenarios to play out, and one of them is a huge increase in single-use waste from single-use disposables, and having city ordinances is something to keep an eye out to see how those going to impact. A lot of them were put on hold during the pandemic. I know they're maybe starting to be what do you call it? Not implemented, but actually enforced in some of the jurisdictions that were passed. So that could make an interesting impact. I'm not sure yet. It's too early to tell.
Okay, so any of my state people, Rachel, Alan, Matt?
Well, I'll just, in terms of collection, that's a tough one. Cities are, setting up, and public awareness, right, is a requirement of 1383. But I will say getting the organics out of landfills is a real benefit to disadvantaged communities, right? If you live near a landfill, you don't want food rotting in that thing. And the amount of engineering that goes into odor suppressing and pest suppressing is huge because of the organic component. So, there is a real environmental justice benefit to getting the food out of the landfill. The problem is compost facilities also have impacts. You got a lot of truck traffic, and VOCs are generated. They're not, scary toxic ones like benzene, like you get from an oil refinery, but it's very hard to get air quality permits to set up a new composting facility, and you often do get local opposition. We have a shortage of compost space in California, and the difficulty of developing them is a real barrier. So there's a global benefit to composting instead of landfilling organic waste, but there can be a local negative impact, and navigating that has proven tough.
Oh yeah, and Rachel, love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at the sort of city and county level, well, at least for stop waste, we in the year 2020 did develop a set of aims and guiding principles, one of which is to really integrate social and racial equity into our programs. And, that's going to take, it's obviously a process. It's going to take many different components and be ongoing. One of the ways that we're trying to incorporate that is making our educational materials more accessible to more people. Translation, of course, is one, but we know that translation isn't the end all be all. That's, not going to get the, sort of equity goals that we're aiming for. So one piece is making sure that as many people can understand what we're trying to convey and make them aware of it in a language that's appropriate for them. But also, really, we have our community engagement team that is really trying to work much more with community-based organizations that know their communities well. We also have a food recovery network of food recovery organizations and services that we meet with monthly, and provide a lot of grants to those kind of organizations, nonprofits primarily, which are really serving those in most need with setting up food redistribution programs and other wraparound services. We also have been, trying to explore more ways to educate folks through specific initiatives. Like we have a Stop Food Waste campaign, and we recently did a whole Spanish language component, and actually the click-through rate for those ads was actually in 1.5 times more click-throughs than the English ads that we had done in the past. So it's really interesting. I think there's really an interest in getting that information. We also had a partnership with the Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce to really try to do a special workshop in language and have that recorded so it would be accessible to a lot of Chinese speaking businesses. So those are some of the initiatives that we've been working on.
I love that. And it had me thinking, like, is there anything, so it looks like when you're partnering with like food recovery, would that be a place for entrepreneurs that can kind of like insert themselves in the food recovery business? Because I kind of talked about we didn't talk about it in public, but food recovery from when it comes to like tech companies, and like Whole Foods is notorious for throwing away food. Is there anything that you can foresee, either you or Alan, into how you can work with those types of entities to start recovering food?
Yeah, well, SB 1383 has a whole component of edible food recovery requirements to certain sectors, and it's phased in. So right now we're in what we call a tier 1, which is addressing larger supermarkets and grocery stores, food distributors, wholesalers, essentially it places requirements on them to set up arrangements with food recovery organizations. So this is like brand new, really. And then in the second phase in 2024, it will go down into sectors like large businesses, hospitals, healthcare, even special events, which are much harder to divert from, and hotels, where there will also have those similar requirements. Those second tier businesses are more of the prepared food. So I think that's gonna, a lot of the food recovery organizations don't yet have a lot of that infrastructure to be able to, safely handle that food. But the goal is to really get that food diverted from the landfill in a higher and better use than composting, so that it can go to feed people who need it.
That's amazing. I love it. I love that. So does anyone want to add on before we go? And then just we have like one more question. Matt, you came off. Did you want to add to that?
Right. Yeah. So 1383 says that these food waste generators have to recover to the maximum extent possible. So it's not 50% of your food waste, it's all your food waste. And you have to have a contract in place with a food recovery organization. They're not obligated to take anything that's gross or that they can't use, right? So we have problems with like donuts, right? Nobody wants to, right? You don't want to refeed that to people. Right, it's going to make a big impact. And there's a lot of entrepreneurialism in the space of if you can't, what can you make out of that kind of non-recoverable food? So you can feed it to soldier fly larvae and create animal feed. You can, there's a company in San Diego making vodka out of recovered bakery products. And Rachel's right that you need to expand the capacity of these food recovery organizations. So Cal Recycle gave out a lot of money in grants for refrigerated trucks and walk-in refrigerators to keep that prepared food edible and transported in a safe way, so it can be fed to people.
Love it. A lot of great work being done. And Paul, one day maybe you can get yourself into those tech companies because they have all those to-go boxes.
Yes, and in terms of like I think hiring people from those communities that are being affected and exposing folks to this, this industry is, and like the reuse industry, zero waste can be seen as a boutique space at times, from the folks that are working in the food industry that are a lot of minorities, for example. So I think we do a lot of education training whenever we roll out a new initiative, and we always do bilingual languages. And I think a lot of people are coming to me saying, hey, can I learn more about what you're doing? Do you have any job opportunities? So I like that interaction that's really real and tangible. And I think opening up this space to folks that are don't have all the background but have the knowledge of their own communities, I think is critical to create change.
Love it. Thank you all. And I see all of your amazing questions in the chat. I'm trying to get to some of those, but we just have one more question that I would love to get to the panelists. And so being that all of you are in various sectors of waste management and waste recovery to an extent, can you tell us a little bit how multi-sector partnerships have supported your work in waste, and also how can sectors work together to solve these big problems? And it seems like I've seen the mechanisms through all the various experiences or companies that you guys work for, how it kind of works. But let's see, who would like to come off? Oh, Alan, would you like to take this one?
Sorry, I was just, can you repeat it, Nina? I was answering some questions in the chat.
No worries. Okay, so being that you have various, all of you have various experiences in waste management and the sector, can you tell us a bit about how multi-sector partnerships have supported your work in the waste, and then how can sectors work together to solve these big problems?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we've already talked about some of kind of, I view as somewhat of the challenges with, kind of navigating the public sector bureaucracy, about the, like with that, equity component, I think sometimes, can stifle innovation a little bit, that needing to, follow, specific procedures about how we engage with other for-profit or nonprofit entities. But that being said, it does happen, and some, municipalities and agencies are better at it than others. And Stop Waste has definitely done some innovative stuff. And one thing that kind of goes into these other things we've been talking about as well is there's a recent work that Stop Waste led, that all of their member agencies, like the city of Fremont, were able to participate in with a nonprofit called Zero Foodprint. That's a really interesting business. There are a bunch of like former chefs that started up that are climate change, passionate about trying to solve climate change. So they started this nonprofit where they've got a couple different business models, but I think the main one is getting restaurants to participate that then add like a 1% fee onto the bill. So then consumers that are visiting that restaurant, those funds go to fund grants that only go to regenerative agriculture projects. So they have a very like rigid vetting process for the farms that they work with, that they need to be sustainable agriculture, that then the farm can have the practices that are able to draw down carbon and fight climate change. So that's one example, I think, of something that we're excited about right now, and grateful that for Stop Waste for leading that.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else want to add anything to that? I think he covered a lot for sure. So as we just starting to get towards the end of this conversation, I can't believe the time has gone so fast. There's been so much great discussion that's happened so far. I just want to pivot into, what did you learn at Presidio that has helped you reach your career goals and life goals and prepare you for the ever-changing sustainability and social justice landscape? Is there anything in particular that jumps out?
Well, obviously Maggie's and Marsha's classes, not just because they're here, but those are those both made an impression with me. I will say, during my time at Presidio, I was the biggest eye roller at the kind of the people skills classes that we took, and the team building and leadership, and that has been absolutely the most useful content that I came across in my time at Presidio. So, under motivating a team that you don't, especially in the sustainability world, you often need people to do stuff, and people who do not report to you, right? You're asking nicely, and to get people pulling in the same direction and inspiring them, and organizing them, is a key skill, right? Very, very rarely are we in a kind of command and control environment when we're trying to do sustainability. So anyway, that was some of the biggest, most useful stuff for me.
Thank you for that.
I'll chime in too with a couple of my professors too, Maggie, Dwight Clark. Also, I'm not sure if many were around when I'm a C2, so I'm very OG in this in the Presidio world. But Ron Nazer, our old provost, he had a process of the pragmatic inquiry where you go through a cycle, and then you get your answers, and then you begin again. And it's okay to begin again and begin again to try to get to what the answers you're looking for, or reset. And I think one lesson that I've learned, and I think it was Bob Doppler's book that we read in one of the classes there, was the path of sustainability is not linear, and it's typically kind of can be complicated and ugly even at times, and people enter it from many different directions. So like being aware of that has helped me a lot in this space, especially as you know, very often we do initiatives that are bleeding edge or very new, and people haven't wrapped their minds around it. So trying to bring everybody up to speed and do it in a respectful manner, and I think is key. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Rachel, Alan, you want to add anything?
I think, I would echo especially some of what Matt said around some of the, people skills, working with others. I was earlier in my career kind of really working a lot with businesses in setting up recycling and composting programs and overseeing consulting contracts that were doing that. And so for me, I also just wanted to have more of the business perspective in getting the MBA, hear about what might, the inner workings of running a business to help me understand them better. And I really think it did. And, it's helped me to just move up in my career through, now I do a bit more of overseeing and managing and coordinating other people. And so those organizational development type of skills have been very useful in that.
Definitely learning that business case. I think that's what we're here. We have all these ideas as people, as sustainability people, we're here, but learning how to put that whole business case together, cradle to cradle. Marcia, that's it, we're going.
Right. And I think just making connections between, multi-sectors, like we were discussing earlier, right? People tend to be very siloed, and that ability to see opportunities that cross silos is kind of a Presidio superpower that graduates have that is all too rare in the working world.
Yeah, I had a couple more questions that I wanted, but I think you guys touched on a lot of those things. So I want to go back up to the audience's questions, if possible, for just to try to get as many of those answered. One more thing about, I definitely want to ask this though, before I go on to the rapid fire. What do you wish you knew while a student and would have better prepared you? So what do you wish you knew while a student that would have better prepared you for, I guess, the next step that happened after Presidio? There's no preparation.
I'm muted, so I'll just would say that's a good question, and I'm sure if I think about it more, there'd be plenty of things. One thing that that struck me was how I was thinking, okay, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to have control of my life more and my future, you know. And then what I didn't expect is that it really controls you. And one thing we learned from Presidio is, like, you know, plan or be planned for. And but you know, so like there's the path is complicated, and maybe you know, I think we did talk about wellness and management of our time and lives, but just something that, you know, it was a little bit on the background as we're learning a bunch of new things. But I think that's an important I think takeaway here was like, wow, you know, like you can we need to make sure we know how to manage ourselves well across, you know, enterprises and type of companies we work for.
I love that. And it's definitely one of those things that you learn as you go through the program. First, you think you're just going to take all of these, and then you're just always at school. But it's like, I have no life. Where's the balance? So it's definitely the challenge. So in the sake of time, I want to kind of do like a rapid fire round in a sense. Just going through the questions that we received in the chat that hopefully we can get through some of those. So Katie had asked a question: any advice on ensuring transparency in the recycling life? For example, I've been interacted with a couple of recyclers that combine glass and construction waste and claim it'll be recycled later down the line. Oh, that's always somebody else's problem. Have any of you experienced this? How can you tell if the recycler we're using is actually recycling? And I just want one of you to answer one of these questions, and then, because there's a couple. Keeping it to
That's a tough one. I think those C&D people get like one inspection a year, and they end up with a recycling rate that everybody uses for their projects for the rest of the year. So yeah, that perhaps there's an entrepreneurial solution to that. To the certification of these recycling facilities. But generally, if something's recycled, someone's paying for it, right? To be considered recycling. And so, you know, they don't have an interest in paying for materials they're not going to use. They may pay for material that's contaminated, and they throw out the contamination, which is a problem. But yeah, hopefully the idea is it's ending up in new products.
Okay, so it's the honor system. We are still working on that. We're hope that people are doing the right thing that they're supposed to be doing. Savannah had a question. Thank you, Matt, for that answer. Because that was a difficult one to add, because you can never really know. Savannah had asked, what has been your most successful strategy to get people to care about diverting and reducing waste? Let's see. Rachel.
Okay. Well, I think I've mostly worked in the sort of business sector as opposed to sort of residents. But I think the tricky part is that different people are motivated by different things, right? And so at least in assisting businesses, you're trying to deduce what will motivate them, you know, what that particular business. And sometimes it's cost savings, sometimes it's the environmental and climate change benefits. And also sometimes people are not motivated until enforcement occurs, which we've seen over time. So I would say, you know, it varies, but that navigating your messaging to try to address multiple motivations can be tricky, and this like art sometimes.
Thank you. That was a lot. Yeah, sometimes it's almost like wear your seatbelt. People don't do it until you like putting a fine associated with it. Unfortunate. Heath had a great question. I am looking into deposit return systems around the world. I have never heard of that, so I'm looking to learn more. California's DRS is a lot more complex than comparative schemes. Can any of you comment on whether the complexity benefits or hampers the efficacy of collection? So
I think Matt should take that one.
Thank you, Matt. I'm like, I have no idea who to direct that to.
So it is very this is when you bring your beverage container back and get your nickel back, and please do that. It creates a much cleaner recycling stream that's much more usable by businesses. And so my division was responsible for everything that's not a beverage container. And I had about 200 people. And that's 99% of the waste stream. And the division that handled beverage container recycling, this DRS system, was also 200 people, because that system is so complex, right? And Yeah, it certainly hampers things. The problem is there's a lot of very involved stakeholders, and people want a comprehensive solution that always seems out of reach, and then vote against piecemeal solutions because we need a comprehensive solution, and so no changes happen. And so we have things like, to be a recycler, you have to attend a class and take a paper test. Well, during the pandemic, we didn't want to do classes, so we couldn't certify new recyclers, right? There's also a lot of NIMBYism about beverage container recycling collection points, because it tends to be the disadvantaged folks who are doing that work. And so then there's these recycling deserts where you can't get your nickels back. So it's a real problem, and comprehensive solutions seem out of reach. Yeah.
That was a great answer. And CRVs, thank you for that. Now I know what that is when we basically get money back. Love it.
Yeah, and go do it. It's kind of fun.
So now I'll stop complaining to my mother about why are we always piling up all of these bottles. I'll let her keep piling up the bottles. Okay. Olga had a question. Can you explain how the waste would get sorted and back to producers? Is that on the waste company to sort and work with these packaging producers to sell, give back?
Yeah, I mean, they're selling a product, right? It's a bale of something that someone can use. And so if the purchaser, say in Asia, in China, may require a low contamination rate, then they'll make bales to that specification. Sometimes the bales show up and it's the recycler has to do some sorting, but it's really kind of a private sector negotiation over the specifications of those bales. The problem is if there's not a market, it goes in a mixed plastic bale, and then overseas recyclers may pick out the valuable plastics and dump the rest. So you thought it was getting recycled, but only the valuable components were getting recycled. So does that answer the question? I don't know.
Yes, I definitely think so. Let's see. Any more questions? I have one from Maureen. Does the food recovery cover office spaces? Oh, I think that was answered in the chat. Was that the one Alan had answered in the chat? For sure. And then let's see, I tried to keep track as best as I could. So sorry if I skip over your question, because I know Johan, you had another one. So I'll just get back up to you. Are most problems of cost reduction solution, are there any problems on the revenue side? With our last minute left, if someone's to answer that in 30 seconds or less.
I'm not sure I quite get the question.
Let's see. Are most problems a cost reduction solution? Are there any problems on the revenue side? Is Johan, are you on here? Do you want to just come off and ask what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the business propositions are about how we reduce costs for in operations. And I wonder if there's a way to look at it in terms of generating revenue. How can we make these things, instead of reducing, create revenue, create a stream of opportunities?
I could try a little bit. Oh, Paul, do you want to take it?
Well, Rachel, go ahead, and then maybe I'll just chime in with one quick comment.
Well, one thing that occurred to me is that there are companies who are, like they may be incorporating recovered materials into a product line or their, overall business operations, and using that as, they're the more environmental product. And so then it could be generating revenue in that way. So it's that aspect of like, they may be able to get that recovered material for a less expensive rate than new virgin materials. So that could be one way of creating revenue.
So it is 1 o'clock. I'm sorry, I have to do a hard stop in the sake of respecting everyone's time. Oh my gosh, we could go on and on and on. So what that means, we must have another Trash Talk Part 2, because we definitely didn't get to all of the questions. And with a dynamic panel with a wide range of experience and knowledge, some people, Paul, I think, might be looking for somebody to employ one day down the line. So Presidio, we also heard that network is everything. So please please rely on your Presidio network. And thank you all for joining this afternoon. And that will be all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you.
That was so much fun.
Do it again.
For sure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for organizing.
Yeah, Rachel, it's great.
Total pleasure. All right. Looks
All
like
right,
we're
see you
good to
later.
go. Let's bye, Nina.
Bye.